So for the most part, when there's a jury trial, people tend to be accepting of the verdict that is reached by the jury. There is this belief that the jurors have done their due diligence and that they have looked at all the evidence presented to them and made their decision accordingly. Of course, this didn't happen in the Delphi case. Even though the jury deliberated for 19 hours, which, given that the case went for roughly 17 days, is pretty much on par with what you would expect for a jury in terms of deliberation. Not only that, throughout the trial, the jury continuously asked questions of witnesses and lawyers alike, meaning that they were really engaged in what was being presented to them, and they were really thinking about what was going on in that case. And yet, immediately, you have Kathy Allen coming out of the courtroom saying something to the effect of, "It isn't over yet." And suddenly people saw that as a war cry. Now, I can't blame people for what I'm going to say is basically ignorance. Because what I observed, I must admit, as soon as things started turning into a circus with the Delphi trial, I stopped watching people's coverage of all the circus stuff. I just kept a bit of a background eye on it. I read articles here and there, but I wasn't going to watch people's content because it was turning into a complete utter circus. But it seems to me that from the get-go, the defence team manipulated mainstream media and social media to try and get public opinion on the side of their client, and boy did that work. So many people listened to motion after motion relating to this case because there was this order which prevented people from actually talking about it. So the defence got around that by filing motion after motion, some of them just sounding absurd, and using that to sway public opinion. Heading into the case, I have no doubt that a number of these people who attended the court and who were reporting each evening on live streams had been approached prior to the court case by the defence team and were working on behalf of the defence team. When you hear a person in their live stream referring to the defence, one of the defence attorneys by his first name and every other attorney by their last name, you got to question it. When this person is editorialising everything that they say in relation to the events of the day and leaving out information, then you've got to question what's going on here. When you hear reports of notes being passed between YouTubers and the defence team in court, you've got to question what's going on. So we get a verdict. Richard Allen is guilty on all 4 counts. Now, logic would dictate that if you have actually listened to factual information from the case, then logic would dictate that that is a fair and just verdict. But instead you get a circus. Not only that, but those people who have come out and said that they are glad of this verdict, that they are glad that there is now justice for the girls, all this, have been treated basically quite horribly by people with a bias and a belief that Richard Allen is innocent. People who have watched the biased reporting from the court case, believed what they've been told, and are now convinced that Richard Allen is a patsy, that he's innocent, and that he's been framed. So this witch hunt seems like it's going to continue. I've noticed that Michelle After Dark, just for one, is really pushing the narrative right now in terms of coming up with not so plausible explanations of the evidence that was given during the trial. Once again, showing her confirmation bias, even admitting that she only watched certain creators because she knew that they supported Richard Allen. So she's even admitting her bias there, and that she chose not to watch during the trial creators who were simply reporting facts as opposed to defence lawyers who were going on YouTube and basically reporting on behalf of the defence. And the amount of vitriol that is coming out of her mouth is sad. There is a witch hunt against anyone who supports this guilty verdict, and it feels like there is victimisation going on towards the families of these beautiful girls. These families have now got a new reality to adapt to. They're no longer in the fighting for justice phase. Justice has been served. It's not a time for celebration. There would be this incredible sense of emptiness. Not only are the girls gone, but that mission that kept them burning for the last 7.5 years, that is ended. They now have to find a new way to fill that void. The void that's been left by two beautiful, beautiful girls who have died. So, since there is so much negativity still being pushed out and some utterly ridiculous things still being pushed out onto YouTube, I've decided that I'm going to do a number of videos which simply look at this case on a factual basis, looking at what was presented in court and examining it as facts. What is the actual truth, as opposed to the rumours, the stories that have been pushed by the defence? What is it that we know, not that we believe? In this video, I want to talk about the difference between someone being in isolation and someone being in solitary confinement, because they are two very, very different things. Now, sure, any prisoner is going to struggle to adapt when they are first incarcerated. Let's accept that, because that is part of what has gone on here. But the other thing I want to address amongst this is this notion that Richard Allen was being tortured. So to those people who are making claims such as this, please do show the evidence of this. Because honestly, if there was evidence, I'm sure we would have seen it by now. I'm sure there would be a case in court right now on behalf of Richard Allen over him being tortured. But you know what? There isn't. I'm sure many inmates feel that they are tortured because they can't just hop in the car and go for a drive down to the shop. When you are incarcerated, you do have to lose some rights. Now let's talk about isolation versus solitary. First of all, why was Richard Allen put in a state prison? It was acknowledged early on that in terms of safekeeping, basically to keep him alive, because this guy was accused of a double murder of 2 teenage girls. He needed to be in an institution that could guarantee his safety. One that had enough protocols and security in place to ensure that he survived through the trial. People have forgotten that. It's something that the defence team have very carefully skipped around. Instead, we're told he was treated badly because he was sent to this place. He was sent there because the other jails didn't have the facilities for him. Let's talk about him being in isolation. He was sent to... Now, I get confused between prison and jail. So you will have to just accept that I do that, because in Australia they are interchangeable. No matter how hard I try to learn the difference between prison and jail in the American system, I still get it confused. So if you're a troll, sure, if you want to give me free comments below having a go at me because I can't remember the difference between prison and jail, that's fine. That's free engagement for my video. Gets it out to more people, gets it seen by more people. But please accept that this is just an Australian who tries to understand a system that is very different. In Australia, like I said, the terms are interchangeable. Richard Allen was sent to a jail for his own protection, but that jail, because it is for people who are convicted, had some pretty tough nuts in there. And, you know, the whole point was he needed protection. Not only that, he needed to be protected from himself as well, because there was a risk of S. You know what I mean by S? YouTube doesn't like certain words. So, regardless of where he was incarcerated, he was always going to be in a cell on his own. And he was always going to be kept separate from the general population. Had he been put in the general population, chances are he would not have made it through to trial. There would have been people that would have been quite happy to do what they needed. There would have been people in the prison population who were probably never getting out anyway and probably wouldn't have cared about what they did to Richard Allen. So let's get that clear first. He needed to be in isolation for his own safety. But he also needed to be in a special cell where he could be monitored 24/7 to make sure that he didn't unalive himself, because he was seen as being at risk of that. He had mental health issues before he was incarcerated. He was struggling with depression. So they had a duty of care to keep him safe. They needed to keep him away from the general population, and they also needed to be able to monitor him 24/7. Yes, those cells are less stimulating than regular cells. And why is that? Because those cells need to be set up in a way to make them safe so that there is nothing within that cell that would allow that person to unalive themselves. So that is going to make it a more sterile environment, sadly. But at the same time, let's start looking at the difference between isolation and solitary confinement, because Richard Allen was not in solitary confinement. He had his own cell. But, for starters, he could talk to other inmates who were outside his cell. That means there were other cells beside his, and they could talk to each other. Chances are there was one of those little, mailbox slot things that they could lift and actually get eye contact with each other. He had companions who were stationed outside his cell. He could talk to them. Clearly he did speak to them because they recorded various things that were said by Richard Allen. Not only that, on a daily basis, he was allowed to spend time with his psychologist. She was a clinical psychiatrist or psychologist. She was there for therapeutic reasons. She wasn't there to assess him. She wasn't there to judge him. She was there to provide support for him, emotional support, to listen to him, to help him to process what was going on. That was occurring on a daily basis. And provided he didn't stick his heels in and say he wasn't leaving the cell, he was able to leave the cell to do that. He was also allowed to leave the cell to make phone calls with his family. Do you think there was a phone in the cell? No way. He was allowed to continue having contact with his family. He came out of his cell to make those phone calls. He was allowed to have exercise time. Sure, it wasn't out in the big yard where you would have the general population because, like I said, he needed protecting. Had they allowed him out into the main yard to do exercise, he probably would not have come back in. He was given a tablet, so he wasn't starved for stimulation. He was given the option of having a television, but he chose not to. So there were plenty of things that were there to provide mental, emotional, physical stimulation for him. How does this compare with solitary confinement? When a person is placed in solitary confinement, they lose all their privileges. They may be allowed out of their cell for part of the day for exercise, but certainly not with anyone around. They are not able to communicate with anyone else. They're not going to be able to communicate with other inmates like he had the option of doing. They're not allowed out of their cell other than for probably a brief period of time for exercise. They lose privileges. They do not have a tablet. They do not have a television. They do not have phone calls to their family. And they do not have the chance to come out of their cell and sit with a therapeutic psychiatrist to discuss what's going on in their world. Solitary confinement is just that. They are isolated. They don't have those connections with other people. And yet Richard Allen did. Not only that, he still had things that would not have been allowed for someone in solitary. He still had a tablet until he destroyed it. He had the option of a television. He was still allowed contact with his family. All these things are privileges that are removed when someone is put into solitary confinement. Yes, for anyone being in a cell on their own, even if they do get out several times a day, that is going to impact on their mental health. But it is not the same sort of impact on their mental health as you would see with someone in solitary confinement. His psychoses are not connected to solitary confinement because he was not in solitary confinement. So these people quoting studies about solitary confinement causing psychoses, yada, 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 that's inaccurate because he was not in solitary confinement. I will address his confessions and the psychoses in another video because that's just going down another rabbit hole. But for this one, I just wanted to highlight the differences between isolation and solitary confinement. It is solitary confinement which has significant impacts on mental health, not isolation. This guy would have been isolated wherever he was kept. And I can assure you there are inmates throughout America and throughout Australia who are in isolation for their own safety. Do you think Brian Koberger is out in the general population? No way, because he would be a goner so quickly. Anytime someone is charged with crimes against children, crimes against women, there's a target on their back the moment they enter jail or prison. And it is incumbent on the organisation to protect them. That's what was happening with Richard Allen. So I'll leave it at that. And I will be adding more videos to this Delphi fact sheet through this week. Now, I do need to say, I'm not normally someone who would delete comments on my channel. I'm not normally someone who would block people. But given people's behaviour online when it comes to this case, I am going to give a warning. That is that if you are not showing respect towards the victims, their families, towards myself, towards my subscribers, anyone who is commenting, then your comment will be removed and you may end up being blocked from my channel. I've got some really fantastic subscribers. There are some really wonderful people who put thoughtful comments in my videos. And I enjoy reading those comments. And I take pride in knowing that, for the most part, my channel is a safe place for people who choose to comment. And I wish to maintain that. So for that reason, I will not be tolerating hatred of any sort on this channel. If you have a different opinion from mine, please do share. But I would like you to back up what you're saying with actual facts. Don't simply turn around and say, you are wrong. Make an educated argument, and I'm more than willing to listen. If you're just going to spout the same rhetoric that's been put out by countless other people for the last 2 years, probably save your breath, because I'm not going to be swayed by anything other than an educated argument. And like I said, if you are disrespectful, you're not staying. So I know that sounds a bit tougher than my usual stance on here, and I apologise to my regulars for sounding a little bit harsh. So thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. And of course, hit the like button, and please do leave a comment below. Thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.